Christianity is not a religion about God, it's a relationship with God. In my freshman theology class today and yesterday, we talked specifically about the passion of Jesus and the resurrection. First, just a quick review again, like the other day, the last lesson plan, we talked about how the passion and the death of Jesus is a sign of Jesus' humanity, and so we can relate to that. The resurrection and the ascension is a sign of hope, that if Jesus is human and he rises from the dead and ascends to heaven, then we can hope for a similar situation like that. So I do teach to the students at some point in class today about the second coming of Jesus and the judgment, the resurrection and the judgment of the living and the dead. The bell work is probably the key part of the class today. I asked students to just reflect on or to remember a time when they broke a bone, like in their leg or in their arm, or when they knew a friend who something like that happened to. And I asked them to think, like how long did they have a cast on, and most importantly, what did they do when they had the cast removed. This conversation goes on for a long time because a lot of students want to share these stories of, things that have happened to them or to other people. Some classes, when they're really comfortable with each other, they share some of the grossest stories you can imagine, but of like fingers getting chopped off or things like that. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of good times to discuss these things. And excuse me. And I'm glad that we have that opportunity to share in that way. But I end that conversation talking about how the death and the resurrection of Jesus is analogous or it's similar to when you have a cast on and you can't move and you can't do what you are made to do, what you want to do, what you love to do. That's basically like death. Jesus shows us in his death and resurrection that death is kind of like a cast. And when that cast is removed, we become free to do what we are made to do what we love to do. Jesus, in his resurrection, he comes back and he continues to serve the poor. He continues to preach. He continues to inspire. He continues to heal. And that's really ultimately what our resurrection should be. So the conversation that I have with the students is really talking about what is the purpose of the resurrection for us. And at the end of the day, the resurrection really is a sign of hope for us that one, God, Jesus, he loves the poor. He loves those who are without. This is why he appears to women first, because at the time in that culture, and even to this day, women are often considered lower in class. And so Jesus goes to them first. Jesus appears to his apostles, his disciples, his best friends who had such deep faith in him. But when he appears to them, they were falling away from their faith. They had lost faith. And so Jesus appears to them to tell them that their faith before his crucifixion, that faith was real. That faith was true. So I tell the students, even though we may not see Jesus physically in front of us, even though we may struggle to believe, our faith may falter, he is still present. He is still there. He does return. We talk about the second coming of Jesus, and the students love asking questions about how does the judgment work? How does everything work? I don't have all of the answers for that. All I can tell them is that what we believe in Catholicism is that when we die, or at the end of time, God resurrects everyone. Jesus resurrects everyone and offers us the final judgment. Will we go to heaven? Will we go to hell? Yeah. So the other part of the class, and I'm just looking at my notes on the board just to be as consistent as possible. But the other part, the other objective, if we get to it, and some of my classes we didn't actually get to it, but we kind of talk about it in the context of our questions and answers. But we talk about exactly what is the role of Jesus' suffering in our covenant relationship with God. And very simply put, and this is really only like one or two slides in the notes for them, in a covenant there's always a sacrifice. And the greater the sacrifice, the more intense the covenant. I don't tell the students this, but this is basically Pauline theology from Hebrews. Basically, because Jesus is the perfect Lamb, the one without sin, and because Jesus is both human and divine in nature, his sacrifice, the sacrifice of God's only Son, is the greatest sign of love that we can possibly imagine. So when we enter into that paschal mystery, when we enter into that suffering in particular, we're responding. We're responding to the covenant invitation that God gives us. The story of Jesus Christ suffering and dying for us is a story of us suffering and dying to ourselves so that we can be in relationship with God. And the result of that relationship is agapic love, beatitude, authentic self.